What happens when forbidden desire collides with duty in the harsh desert? Imagine this: a soldier, highly ranked and respected, sent on a peacekeeping mission to the Middle East. He's there to protect, to bring order to chaos, and to restore peace. But what if the very mission he's sent for, the very duty he swore to uphold, is slowly torn apart by something far more dangerous? Something that's not war or violence, but a forbidden attraction that could cost him everything. Meet Captain Jake Patterson. A man admired by his peers, praised for his leadership, and seen as a hero by his team. But beneath the uniform, something darker is brewing. In a land torn by conflict, where every day is a battle for survival, Jake begins to face a temptation like no other. There, in the sweltering heat of the desert, he meets two sisters, Farah and Layla. Beautiful, confident, and completely off-limits. They're caught in a world of their own, trapped between family expectations and the harsh reality of the war around them. Yet, somehow, their paths cross with Jake's. At first, it's harmless, small glances, casual conversations, but the tension is undeniable. As days pass, the connection between Jake and the sisters grows, and what was once innocent becomes something far more dangerous. A forbidden attraction, something so strong it could destroy everything Jake has worked for, everything he believes in. The mission, the peace, the honor, none of it matters now. In this unforgiving desert, Jake is torn between the life he knows and the life he craves. But in the end, there's only one question that remains: can he control his desires, or will he lose everything? Stay with us, because what happens next will leave you speechless. If you're captivated by this story so far, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and don't forget to turn on notifications so you don't miss the rest of this shocking tale. Trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next. Stay tuned, and let's explore how one man's forbidden desires led to a tragedy no one could have predicted. A highly ranked military officer, admired by many. But what if everything you thought you knew about him was a lie? Let's talk about Captain Jake Patterson, the man at the center of our story. On the surface, he's the model soldier, smart, disciplined, and well-respected. His colleagues look up to him, the higher-ups trust him, and his team believes in his leadership. In many ways, Jake is the perfect soldier. He's seen as the kind of man who can handle anything that comes his way, whether it's a firefight or a diplomatic mission. But behind that picture-perfect exterior, something doesn't quite add up. Jake's reputation is spotless, sure, but it's also carefully crafted. As we peel back the layers, it becomes clear that there's more to this officer than meets the eye. Beneath the polished armor lies a man with secrets. Secrets he's worked hard to keep hidden, even as he navigates the complex world of military duty. Jake's past is like a dark ocean. Beneath the calm surface, there are currents of emotions, desires, and memories that he's tried to bury. It's not just his professional life that's on the line here. As he moves deeper into the desert, we see the internal struggle he faces. A struggle between the life he has, the life he wants, and the choices he knows could destroy everything. In his quiet moments, when he thinks no one is watching, Jake's guard drops. He's not just the dedicated officer he's known to be, he's a man with intense feelings, ones he's kept hidden away for years. As he spends more time in this foreign land, those feelings begin to bubble up. The way he looks at the sisters, Farah and Layla, isn't just curiosity or professional interest. There's something more, something deeper. It's a hunger, an ache that he's never allowed himself to feel, let alone act on. Yet, despite the tension, Jake tries to maintain a sense of normalcy. He goes about his duties with a calm professionalism, keeping up his public image while wrestling with these private thoughts. But the longer he stays in this place, the harder it becomes to ignore his desires. It's like trying to contain a storm in a glass. No matter how tightly he locks away his feelings, the cracks keep widening. Jake's colleagues think they know him, but there's so much they're missing. Beneath his measured words and carefully planned actions, there's a man who's struggling to keep his head above a sea of temptation. He's stuck between duty and desire, each one pulling him in a different direction. And as those feelings intensify, the line between what's right and wrong starts to blur, becoming less and less clear. In many ways, Jake is his own worst enemy. His deep sense of responsibility keeps him grounded, while his growing connection to the sisters threatens to pull him into the unknown. As we watch his story unfold, it's easy to see the conflicting emotions in his eyes: longing, frustration, even a hint of something else. It's a fascinating mix of strength and vulnerability, a man who's built to protect but who's also desperate to be seen for who he really is. The question is, can he balance these competing sides of himself? Or will he be dragged under, consumed by his own secrets? Stick with us as we continue to unravel the truth about Captain Jake Patterson. Trust me, you won't want to look away. It only takes one glance. But what happens when that glance leads to more? Captain Jake Patterson had been in the Middle East for months, but nothing prepared him for what happened the day he met Farah and Layla. He'd seen plenty of faces, plenty of people caught up in the chaos of war, but these sisters were different. It wasn't just their beauty, it was something else, something he couldn't quite explain. It started when Jake was assigned to help with a local community project, providing supplies to families affected by the conflict. The hot desert sun beat down on him, the constant dust swirling around, but when he walked into that small village, something changed. There, standing just outside a makeshift shelter, were the two sisters. Farah, the older one, had this calm, graceful presence. She wasn't like the others. She was poised, her eyes full of something Jake couldn't read, but they seemed to draw him in. And Layla, the younger sister, had a spark. She was full of energy, her smile lighting up the dusty air. The moment their eyes met, Jake felt a rush of something he hadn't experienced in a long time, a pull, an undeniable attraction that he tried to ignore but couldn't. At first, it seemed harmless. Farah spoke to him politely, asking about the supplies and offering him water. But there was something in her gaze, a silent challenge, a hint that maybe she wasn't as innocent as she seemed. Layla, on the other hand, was all charm. She laughed at something Jake said, making him feel more comfortable, yet every time their eyes locked, Jake's heart skipped a beat. The chemistry was instant, and it felt electric. He could feel a connection building, one he knew was dangerous but couldn't push away. Jake tried to keep things professional, but there was no denying the tension in the air. The heat of the desert seemed to grow even hotter, and the distance between him and the sisters felt smaller with each passing second. He found himself stealing glances, his mind racing. What is this? Why do I feel this way? As the day went on, Jake found more reasons to stay near them. Whether it was helping them move boxes, chatting with the villagers, or just offering a listening ear, he couldn't help himself. The sisters were like a magnet, pulling him in with every word, every touch. He knew he had to be careful. He knew that nothing good could come from this. Yet, every time they spoke, every time they smiled, Jake felt like he was losing control. The moment that changed everything came when Jake found himself alone with Farah. Layla had stepped away for a moment, and Farah looked at him in a way that made his breath catch. Her gaze was intense, but there was no fear in it, only desire. Her voice was soft as she spoke, asking him about his life, about his mission. But it wasn't just the words, it was the way she looked at him, the way her lips curled into a slight smile that made Jake's pulse race. For a brief second, there was no war. No mission. Just them, standing there in the sweltering heat, caught in a moment that neither of them should have been in. Farah reached out to touch his arm lightly, and Jake felt a jolt of electricity shoot through him. He knew it was wrong. He knew he should step back. But he couldn't. The attraction was too strong. The pull was undeniable. Layla came back just in time, breaking the moment, but the damage had already been done. Jake tried to shake off the feelings, to focus on his duty, but his mind kept drifting back to the sisters. He couldn't stop thinking about Farah's gaze, Layla's laughter, the way they both made him feel alive in a way he hadn't felt in years. And so, the seed of temptation was planted. A single glance, a brief touch, and everything started to shift. Jake knew that this was the beginning of something dangerous. What was supposed to be a simple mission in a war-torn land was now a fight against something much stronger, something that could cost him everything. Beneath the heat of the desert sun, love and lust ignite. But in this world, there's no room for mistakes. The sun in the desert beats down relentlessly, scorching everything in its path. But for Captain Jake Patterson, the heat isn't just coming from the burning sky, it's coming from the two sisters. Farah and Layla. The air around them crackles with tension, thick and heavy, as the attraction grows stronger with each passing moment. It wasn't supposed to happen. Jake knew better. He knew that this mission was about duty, not desire. But Farah's smile, the way Layla laughed, the way they looked at him, it was impossible to ignore. It was like they were magnets, drawing him in no matter how hard he tried to resist. One night, when the desert air was a little cooler, Jake found himself alone with Farah again. They were sitting outside, under the fading light of the sun, just talking about the mission, about their lives. But there was something different this time. The conversation wasn't just words. There was an energy between them, something electric. It wasn't just polite small talk anymore, it was personal, it was real, and it felt dangerous. Farah's eyes met his, and for the first time, there was no hiding it. She wanted him. And Jake, despite every ounce of his self-control, wanted her too. His heart raced, his pulse quickened. The temptation was too much. He leaned in, and just for a second, the world around them faded away. Their lips met in a kiss, slow at first, but growing with intensity. Every touch felt like fire, every second like it was both the best and worst thing he could do. He knew it was wrong. He knew the consequences could be devastating. But in that moment, none of that mattered. Farah's hands on his chest, her breath against his skin, it felt like the only thing that mattered was the heat between them. But it wasn't just physical. There was something deeper, something more complicated at play. As they pulled away, both breathless, Farah looked at him with a mix of desire and regret. Her eyes spoke 1,000 words. She was caught between the pull of this forbidden affair and the reality of the world they were in. She wanted this. But could she live with the consequences? Could he? Jake didn't have answers, but he knew one thing: this wasn't just a kiss. It was the beginning of something he couldn't stop. And the worst part? He didn't want to. The more time he spent with Farah, the more the emotions grew. What started as a dangerous attraction turned into something deeper, something that felt like it could consume him. But the affair wasn't just hard for Jake. Layla, the younger sister, was in the picture too. She noticed the way Jake and Farah looked at each other, the secret glances, the lingering touches. She didn't say anything at first, but the tension was there. Layla, though more playful than Farah, couldn't hide the jealousy that crept in when she saw them together. It was a feeling Jake couldn't ignore, and it only made everything worse. Now, not only was he dealing with his feelings for Farah, but also the impossible situation of how to deal with Layla's growing attraction to him. Every day was a storm of emotions. Jake tried to keep things professional, to keep the affair from becoming too obvious, but it was impossible. The desire was too strong. The more he was around them, the more he wanted them, both of them. They were always there, always in his thoughts. Every meeting, every conversation was charged with something more than just words. Every smile, every touch, sent his heart racing. And the worst part? He knew that in this world, there was no room for mistakes. The danger wasn't just in being caught, it was in what this affair was doing to his heart. To Farah's heart. To Layla's. The emotional turmoil was tearing at him. He wanted to be close to them, to give in completely, but he knew it couldn't last. The truth was, in a world like theirs, love and lust couldn't just exist without consequences. But the more they fought against it, the more the pull between them grew. And with every stolen moment, every kiss, every touch, Jake found himself more lost, more tangled in the web he'd created. This was no longer just an affair. It was a storm waiting to break. What happens when family loyalty is tested by forbidden passion? Farah and Layla were more than just sisters, they were everything to each other. Growing up in the heat of a war-torn world, they had always relied on one another for support, for strength. But now, standing at the crossroads of loyalty and desire, everything was changing. It all started with Jake, Captain Jake Patterson. A man they never expected to become part of their lives. A man they never expected to stir feelings in them both. For Farah, it was the slow burn of forbidden attraction. At first, she tried to ignore it. Jake was a soldier, a visitor in their world of danger and uncertainty. She knew the risks of falling for him. But the more time she spent with him, the harder it became to pretend that nothing was happening. There were moments when his touch lingered a little too long, when his gaze held something deeper, something she couldn't resist. Farah struggled with this, torn between the love and respect she had for her sister and the undeniable pull she felt toward Jake. But Layla was different. She was playful, free-spirited, and not afraid to show her feelings. At first, it seemed harmless, just a harmless flirtation, a smile here, a laugh there. But soon, Layla began to want more. She couldn't help it. The attraction to Jake was real, and it was growing. She had always been the bold one, the one who didn't shy away from what she wanted. But now, she was trapped. She couldn't ignore the way she felt about Jake, even though she could see the connection between him and her sister. It was impossible to ignore the tension between them all. The unspoken words, the looks that said more than anything could. Farah could feel the jealousy rise in her chest, but there was more. Layla was her sister, her closest friend. How could she betray that bond? And yet, how could she fight the desire she felt when Jake was near? The sisters found themselves in an impossible position. Layla began to pull away from Farah, avoiding her, trying to hide her growing feelings for Jake. She told herself that it was just a phase, something that would pass. But every time she saw Jake and Farah together, it was like a dagger to her heart. She couldn't keep pretending that she wasn't in love with him. Farah, on the other hand, was fighting her own battle. She didn't want to hurt her sister, but how could she deny what was happening? Every stolen glance, every quiet conversation with Jake, felt like a dream, but it was a dream she knew she couldn't keep. Her loyalty to her family, to her sister, was everything. But so was her desire for Jake, a man who had quickly become impossible to resist. In a quiet moment, Farah pulled Layla aside. "I know what's going on," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I can see it in your eyes." Layla looked down, unable to meet her sister's gaze. The silence between them stretched, thick with emotion. It wasn't anger, but pain. Farah's heart ached for her sister, for herself. How could they both want the same man? How could they both love him when they were bound by blood? "Farah, I never wanted to hurt you," Layla confessed, her voice breaking. "But I can't help the way I feel. I can't stop thinking about him." Tears welled up in her eyes. "I don't want to hurt you. I swear, I don't." Farah reached out, touching her sister's arm. "I never wanted this either. But we're sisters. We should have each other's backs, not fight over a man." But it was too late. The emotions, the tension, had already taken root. The love for Jake was like a wildfire, burning both of them. Neither sister could pull away, no matter how hard they tried. Jake, too, felt the weight of the situation. He was pulled in different directions, toward Farah's quiet, intense desire, and Layla's bold, passionate advances. Every day was a struggle for him. How could he choose between the two of them? How could he betray one when both had a hold on his heart? He tried to keep his distance, but the pull was too strong. The connection he had with them both was undeniable, and the more he resisted, the deeper he sank. For both Farah and Layla, the emotional turmoil was overwhelming. Their loyalty to each other, their family, was being tested in ways they never imagined. The passion they felt for Jake was a fire they couldn't extinguish, but at what cost? Their bond as sisters, once unbreakable, was starting to fray. Their hearts were torn, and every moment with Jake only made it harder to turn away. What would happen when the truth came out? When the emotional stakes grew even higher? Stay tuned to find out. If you're enjoying this intense, emotional journey, be sure to like, subscribe, and turn on the notifications. Your support means everything to us. Let us know in the comments what you think about the sisters' dilemma. Who do you think Jake should choose, and what will happen next? A man torn between two worlds, his duty as a peacekeeper and his burning desires. Captain Jake Patterson stood in the middle of the desert, his eyes scanning the horizon. The sun was relentless, but it wasn't just the heat he was struggling with. It was something much deeper. The weight on his shoulders felt heavier than any pack he had ever carried. His duty as a peacekeeper was supposed to be his focus, his mission was clear. But how could he concentrate on his duty when his heart, and his body, were consumed with thoughts of Farah and Layla? Every moment he spent with them twisted him further. The feelings he had for both sisters were undeniable. Farah's calm, controlled gaze, her quiet strength, it all pulled him in. Layla, with her boldness and fire, made him feel alive in a way he hadn't in years. He found himself drawn to them both, torn between what he knew was right and what he couldn't stop wanting. His mission was clear: maintain peace, help the people, keep control. But when he looked at the two sisters, when they smiled at him, laughed with him, it was impossible to ignore the pull between them. Every time Farah touched his arm, or Layla's gaze lingered just a little too long, Jake felt his control slipping. His duty? It felt like a distant memory. Every time he was near them, the line between right and wrong seemed to fade. The conflict inside him grew with every passing day. Should he stay focused on his peacekeeping mission, on the responsibility that came with his rank, or should he give in to the burning desire he felt for Farah and Layla? He told himself it was just a temporary weakness, just a moment of desire. But it wasn't. It was something deeper, something that he couldn't ignore. And as much as he tried to resist, it was clear that this affair was starting to consume him. Each stolen moment with them made him question everything he stood for. The truth was, Jake wasn't just battling the emotions he felt for the sisters. He was battling his own sense of honor. As a soldier, as a peacekeeper, he had always followed orders, always kept his emotions in check. But now, standing between the sisters, who both wanted him, he found himself in a storm of confusion and guilt. What kind of man was he becoming? The man who had sworn an oath to protect, to keep peace, was now breaking the most important rule of all: never get involved in personal matters. The affair was dangerous. He knew it. But there was no turning back now. Farah and Layla had become more than just women to him, they were his secret, his weakness, and no matter how hard he tried to stay focused on the mission, they were always on his mind. Every time he closed his eyes, he could see their faces. The way Farah's lips curved into a smile, the way Layla's laughter filled the air. They haunted him, in the best and worst ways. Jake had always been in control of his emotions, but now, every time he was near them, it felt like he was losing that control. What did he want more? To honor his duty, to stay loyal to his mission? Or to give in to the desire that was slowly consuming him, threatening to pull him under? The heat of the desert wasn't the only thing making him sweat. Every time he saw one of the sisters, his heart raced. Every touch, every glance, made him feel like he was losing himself. He tried to pull away, but the more he fought, the stronger the pull became. He couldn't ignore it. And the worst part? He didn't want to. Late one night, after a long day of work, Jake found himself sitting alone, staring at the stars. The sounds of the desert were quiet, but his mind was anything but. He thought about Farah, her eyes, her gentle touch. Then Layla, her energy, her fire. Both of them. Both of them had a piece of him. He didn't know how to choose, and worse, he didn't know if he should. His duty to his country, to his mission, was supposed to come first. But in his heart, he felt torn between the passion he had for the sisters and the responsibility that weighed on him. He had always been a man of control, but now, it felt like he was unraveling. Each day spent with Farah and Layla was a day that made him question everything. Could he keep this affair a secret? Could he keep his emotions buried deep enough to stay focused on the mission? Or would the fire between them consume him completely? As he sat in the silence of the desert night, the decision became harder and harder to avoid. The officer inside him screamed for control, for duty, for focus. But the man inside him, the man who wanted to feel, to be wanted, couldn't ignore the call of passion. Jake's struggle was far from over. In fact, it was only just beginning. With every passing day, the conflict inside him grew stronger. What would happen when duty and desire finally collided? Would he lose everything? Secrets always come to light. But this secret? It would cost a life. It was a quiet evening in the desert, the kind where the wind whispers through the sand and everything feels still, like the calm before a storm. But little did they know, a storm was already brewing, one that would tear everything apart. Jake had kept his affair with Farah and Layla hidden for weeks. Every stolen moment, every shared touch, felt like a dangerous game. The heat between them, the secret they shared, had always been a thin thread. But secrets have a way of unraveling, especially in a place like this. And when that thread snapped, it would be nothing short of devastating. It started when Layla overheard a conversation, one that she shouldn't have heard. Her heart stopped when she realized what was happening. She had known something was off, but hearing it confirmed in the rawest way was more than she could handle. The man she had been falling for, the man who had made her feel seen, had been seeing her sister behind her back. Farah and Jake. Together. The betrayal hit Layla like a slap to the face. The man she had given herself to wasn't the one she thought he was. Worse, her own sister had been a part of it all along. How could Farah do this to her? How could she share such a personal, intimate connection with Jake and hide it from her? Layla's mind raced as she struggled to hold back the tears. She couldn't believe it. She had given herself to Jake, trusted him, and here he was, betraying both her and her sister. The betrayal stung, but it was the hurt from Farah that cut deepest. How could Farah keep this secret from her? Were they laughing at her behind her back? Or worse, did they think she wouldn't care? Farah, on the other hand, was already feeling the weight of her own guilt. She had tried to convince herself that what was happening with Jake didn't mean anything, that it was just a fleeting moment. But the more she tried to ignore it, the harder it became to deny her feelings. She had fallen for him, harder than she ever wanted to admit. And that, in itself, felt like another betrayal. She wasn't just hiding something from her sister, she was hiding something from herself. The moment Layla confronted her was explosive. How could you do this to me? Layla's voice cracked with anger and hurt, her fists shaking with emotion. Farah stood there, frozen, unable to say a word. She had never seen her sister so angry, so betrayed. Farah's heart pounded in her chest as she struggled to find the right words, but there were none. The truth was too much. I never meant for it to happen, Farah whispered, her voice barely audible. I didn't want this, Layla. I swear, I didn't want to hurt you. But the damage was already done. Layla wasn't listening. All she could feel was the crushing weight of betrayal. Her sister, her closest friend, had been hiding the truth from her all along. And Jake? He was no different. He had played both sisters, using their emotions as if they were pawns in a game. In the midst of the chaos, Jake finally arrived, but it was too late. He had known this day was coming. He had tried to push the thoughts of Farah and Layla out of his mind, to focus on his mission. But there was no running from the truth. It was all out in the open now. Farah and Layla's eyes were filled with anger and pain, and Jake felt like the ground beneath him had disappeared. You knew, didn't you? Layla's words were sharp, cutting through the air. You knew everything, and you still did it. You used us both. Do you even care? Jake opened his mouth, but no words came out. He had no excuse. No reason that could make what had happened any better. I'm sorry, he said, but it felt empty. It was too late for apologies now. Farah looked at him, her face a mix of guilt and hurt. You told me you cared, she said, her voice trembling. You told me I was special, that I meant something to you. But you betrayed me. You betrayed both of us. Tears streamed down her face as she turned away from him, unable to face him any longer. The silence that followed was deafening. The once promising affair had now turned into a disaster. Jake realized, too late, that his actions had consequences. He had torn apart the very people he had come to care about. The betrayal wasn't just between him and the sisters, it was a wound that cut through everything they had once believed about themselves and each other. Layla stormed off, her anger boiling over. Farah, left standing with Jake, felt like the weight of the world was on her shoulders. She wanted to scream, to ask why, but the words wouldn't come. All that was left now was a broken trust. A betrayal that shattered everything. In the end, Jake stood there, realizing the one thing he had feared most: his choices had cost him not just the trust of the sisters, but also any chance of redemption. The affair was over, and the fallout would be felt for a long time. What happens when the truth comes crashing down? When everything you thought you knew about the people you love shatters in an instant? Can they ever rebuild what's been broken? What was supposed to be a quiet, forbidden love affair turned into a violent and tragic end. The night was suffocating. The desert air, thick and dry, felt heavier than usual. Everything was still, but the tension was undeniable. The affair that had begun in secret, filled with stolen kisses and whispered promises, was now unraveling in the most violent way possible. Jake stood in the center of the room, his fists clenched at his sides. Farah and Layla were on opposite sides of him, both filled with emotions too raw to hide. Anger, pain, and betrayal clouded the room like a storm ready to explode. You knew, didn't you? Layla's voice was sharp, cutting through the silence like a knife. Her face was flushed with rage, her hands trembling at her sides. The hurt in her eyes burned through Jake like fire. You used us both. Played us like fools. Jake tried to speak, to explain himself, but the words stuck in his throat. What could he say? How could he possibly fix what he had done? He had torn their lives apart, and there was no going back. Farah, her face pale and strained, stepped forward. How could you, Jake? Her voice was barely a whisper, but it was laced with so much emotion it could have shattered glass. How could you do this to us? To me? I loved you. Jake's chest tightened. He had loved her too. He had loved them both in ways he couldn't explain. But none of that mattered now. The lies, the deception, everything had caught up to him, and it was too late to make things right. Enough. Layla screamed, her voice cracking as the anger reached its boiling point. You think you can just walk away from this? From what you've done to us? You think we'll forgive you? The words cut deep, but it was the fury in Layla's eyes that made his heart race with fear. He saw the pain there, and something else, something darker. Farah grabbed Layla's arm, trying to calm her down, but Layla yanked away violently. The tension between the two sisters had been building for weeks, and now it felt like everything was about to explode. "You both knew the consequences, didn't you?" Layla hissed, stepping closer to Jake, her face inches from his. "You think this is just a mistake?" "No, Jake, this is your fault. And now, you'll pay for it." The words hit like a slap. He tried to take a step back, but Layla was faster. In a moment of pure, raw rage, Layla reached for the knife on the nearby counter. Farah gasped, but it was too late. Layla was already brandishing it, her grip firm, her hands shaking. "No!" Jake shouted, stepping forward in an attempt to stop her, but Farah reached out and grabbed his arm, pulling him back. She was crying, her face filled with shock and fear. "Layla, stop!" Farah begged, her voice breaking. "Don't do this." But Layla's eyes were wild with emotion. The pain of betrayal, the hurt from the lies, all of it had built up to this one moment. She wasn't thinking clearly anymore. The knife felt like an extension of her anger, a way to make the world stop spinning out of control. "I loved you, Jake," Layla cried, her voice hoarse. "But you betrayed me, you betrayed both of us." In one swift motion, Layla lunged forward. Jake's heart raced, his instincts kicking in as he tried to block the attack. But it was too fast, too much. The knife found its mark, and everything seemed to slow down as the blade sank deep into Jake's side. The room went silent. Farah stood frozen, her eyes wide with disbelief. She couldn't breathe, couldn't process what had just happened. She had watched Jake collapse to the ground, the blood spreading around him in a slow, terrible pool. "Jake!" Farah screamed, rushing to his side, her hands trembling as she tried to stop the bleeding. "Jake, please, no." But it was too late. The light in his eyes was fading fast, and Farah felt as if the world was slipping from her grasp. Layla stood frozen, the knife still in her hand, her face pale and shocked, as if she couldn't believe what she had just done. "I didn't mean to," Layla whispered, her voice broken, but the words were hollow. The damage was done. Jake's body lay still, blood staining the floor, the tragic end to a love that had begun in secret, but ended in violence. Farah's sobs echoed through the room, a raw, guttural sound that carried every ounce of heartbreak, regret, and guilt. She looked at her sister, the person she had once trusted more than anyone, and now, she couldn't even recognize her. Layla dropped the knife, her hands trembling uncontrollably. She had never meant for it to end like this. She had never wanted to hurt Jake, never wanted to take his life. But in that moment, in her rage and hurt, she had lost control. And now, the consequences were impossible to escape. The reality of what had happened hit like a tidal wave. They were both to blame. Farah, Layla, and Jake, each of them had played a part in this tragic ending. What was once a forbidden love affair had turned into a nightmare. And in the end, no one walked away unscathed. The love, the passion, the betrayal, everything had led to this one irreversible moment. A life had been taken, and the world they knew would never be the same again. The officer's life spirals into ruin, but what happens when the peacekeeper becomes the enemy? Jake had once been the proud officer everyone admired. A man who stood tall, respected by his peers and trusted by his superiors. But now, all of that was gone. The trust, the respect, the mission, everything had crumbled into nothing. In the blink of an eye, his life, his career, and everything he believed in were shattered. He had crossed a line he never thought he would. His forbidden affair with Farah and Layla had led to a tragedy he could never undo. He had caused it all. The weight of Jake's actions hit him harder than any enemy ever could. His heart pounded as he sat in the empty room, staring at the four walls that felt like they were closing in on him. The images of what happened, the blood on the floor, the pain in their eyes, it played in his mind over and over again. He had loved them both, but love wasn't enough. It never was. Now, Farah was gone, her heart broken beyond repair, her trust in him destroyed. Layla, the sister who had once trusted him, now saw him as nothing more than a monster. And Jake? He was left to face the consequences alone. His career as a peacekeeper, the one thing he had worked so hard for, was slipping away like sand through his fingers. News of the murder spread fast, and soon, the whispers followed him wherever he went. What happened in the desert wasn't just a personal tragedy, it was a public one. His commanding officers, once proud of his service, now saw him as a liability. He was called into the base office, and the tension was thick in the air. His heart raced as he walked into the room. There was no warm greeting, no handshake, just cold, hard stares from the men who once trusted him. "You've let us down, Jake," the senior officer said, his voice low and stern. "You were sent here to maintain peace, to protect. But instead, you destroyed everything." Jake felt a lump form in his throat. His hands shook slightly as he stood there, unable to look anyone in the eye. He had betrayed them all, betrayed everything he stood for. "Sir, I made a mistake," Jake tried to explain, but the words didn't come out right. How could he explain the mess he had created? How could he possibly make anyone understand? "You didn't just make a mistake, Jake," the officer cut in, his voice rising. "You destroyed lives. Not just theirs, but your own. And now, we're all paying the price." Jake wanted to scream, to beg for forgiveness, but there was no one to forgive him. No one who could erase what had happened. His reputation was in tatters. His life as he knew it was over. Outside the base, the world felt like it was closing in on him. He was no longer the hero, the peacekeeper who had earned his stripes. He was the villain, the man whose actions had caused so much pain. He wasn't just facing the loss of his career. He was facing the loss of himself. As the days passed, Jake couldn't escape the shame. He would walk the streets, and people would glance at him, some with pity, some with disgust. He had let everyone down, including himself. He tried to reach out to Farah, but she had shut him out completely. There was no chance for reconciliation. She couldn't forgive him, and neither could Layla. He had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. His calls went unanswered, his messages ignored. The distance between them grew wider and wider, and with each passing day, Jake felt more and more like a stranger to the life he had once known. Then came the inevitable, the official statement. Jake was dishonorably discharged from the military. His name was no longer one of respect. It was a cautionary tale of how a man could lose everything, his job, his future, and his dignity, all for a few moments of weakness. The official papers, the words on the page, hit him like a hammer. He was done. The peacekeeper was no longer needed. He had become the enemy. Jake stood on the edge of it all, looking back at the life he had destroyed. He thought about the mission that had brought him here, the mission that was supposed to help people, to bring peace to a troubled world. But what had he really done? He had betrayed those who trusted him, and in doing so, he had failed the very people he had vowed to protect. Farah and Layla were left to pick up the pieces of their shattered lives. They couldn't undo what had happened. They would carry the weight of the tragedy with them forever. But Jake? He was left alone, in the ruins of his own making. What happens when you lose everything? When the world you knew slips away, and there's nothing left but the regret of your choices? Jake now knew. He had everything to lose, and he had lost it all. In the end, what was really at stake? The lives, the honor, and the people caught in the crossfire. Jake thought he was fighting for something greater, peace, honor, and duty. But in the end, the desert, with its endless stretches of sand, became a symbol of the emptiness he had created. The weight of his actions hung heavy in the air, and the more he thought about it, the more he realized just how much he had lost. The affair had seemed innocent at first, a forbidden spark, a moment of weakness in the harsh world of peacekeeping. But what started as a secret grew into a fire that burned everything around it. Jake's reputation, his job, his trustworthiness, all gone in an instant. And it wasn't just his own life that was ruined. Farah and Layla, the sisters who had once trusted him, were now left to pick up the pieces of their own broken lives. But beyond the personal consequences, there were larger questions that haunted him. What was truly at stake when a man chose desire over duty? When loyalty was betrayed, when emotions ran wild, how much did it cost? Jake had learned the hard way that in moments of weakness, there are no winners. The desert had stripped him of everything he held dear. His career, his integrity, and the people he loved were all casualties of his choices. As he looked back, he couldn't help but wonder if it was all worth it. What had he really achieved in the end? Was it worth losing everything for a fleeting moment of passion? The desert had taken more than he ever imagined. And now, all that was left was the emptiness. If this story moved you, make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell.